Hi, this is Devin at Westchester Residential Opportunities, and this video is part of our series on the basics of the fair housing laws. The normal caveats and disclaimers apply. The presentation is being prepared in April of 2020 and may not be accurate on any other date. We also are not providing legal advice in this video. If you need legal advice, please engage a lawyer. Today we're talking about accessible design and construction, a series of standards that require new residential construction to be more open to persons with physical disabilities. ADC is a crucial element of fair housing law, so let's get into it. To oversimplify, the principles of accessible design and construction can be condensed down to two main definitions, which speak to increasing housing unit and market accessibility, respectively. Firstly, we have requirements which do not make housing completely accessible to all, but create a baseline of minimal accessibility. This speaks to the technical requirements and dimensions, which I'll address later in the presentation, that allow housing units to be more manageable for individuals in wheelchairs. Secondly, a schema that allows people with mobility restrictions to have a larger choice of housing options. Basically, this definition hints at the overall mission of ADC requirements and is crucial to your understanding of them. On a federal level, 4 laws establish accessible design and construction rights and requirements. Today, we're going to focus on the Fair Housing Act and, to a lesser extent, the Americans with Disabilities Act. While the Architectural Barriers Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act are both important in their own ways, they each apply to specific forms of government-funded building construction, whereas the FHA and ADA are much more generally applicable. Firstly, the Fair Housing Act establishes accessible design and construction for public and private multifamily units which were constructed after 1991. By including disability as a protected class, the FHA establishes accessible design and construction as a civil right. Secondly, while not applicable to personal property, the ADA secures accessibility for places of public accommodation. This includes leasing offices, banks, and real estate agencies. While not directly improving the accessibility of one's residence, without the ADA, people with disabilities may be unable to even find such a property. Going forward, we will continue to dive into the Fair Housing Act and the requirements it establishes for housing providers. The Fair Housing Act establishes a long list of federal protected classes, including race, sex, and religion, and the FHA lays out specific protections for persons with disabilities. Firstly, the FHA establishes all persons with disabilities as protected. This includes those with a physical or mental disability, those with a history of a physical or mental disability, others perceived as having a physical or mental disability, and those with disabilities are granted a greater selection of housing options due to ADC requirements. These principles acknowledge that people with disabilities can be discriminated against solely by the design of the built environment. Lastly, the Act also protects one's rights to a reasonable accommodation and modification to your living space, which are requests made by persons with disabilities to make changes regarding policy or physical structure and to ensure that they have equal enjoyment to their unit. Now that we know how the FHA protects those with disabilities, we'll be looking at what the ADC requirements specifically require. The accessible design and construction requirements do not apply to all forms of housing. But first, it should be noted, these requirements, in contrast to others, are not contingent upon the receipt of any government funding. The ADC requirements cover multifamily residential buildings, first constructed or designed for occupancy after March 1991. These multifamily buildings must contain at least 4 units and may include apartment, condominium, and co-op buildings. While buildings that fall under these standards are subject to ADC requirements, that may not be true for every unit in the building. In elevator buildings, all units must comply. In non-elevator buildings, all first floor units must comply. Be aware that the first floor does not always equal the ground floor. Units in buildings that do not meet these standards are not held responsible to be accessible by the FHA. This may include single-family homes, duplexes, and remodels. We will now be examining the specific accessibility requirements laid out by the Fair Housing Act and the ways in which they help to improve accessibility for residents with disabilities. To understand the requirements, one must be aware of 3 frequently used terms. First, accessible. This has already popped up many times in this presentation. It refers to the ability for a building to be approached, entered, and used by individuals. Second, turning space. This speaks to the amount of clear space needed for a person in a standard wheelchair to make a, you guessed it, turn of about 180 degrees. And third, similar to turning space, clear floor space is the minimum floor space needed for a standard wheelchair, which is not in motion. It is 30 by 48 inches. Now, to get into the specifics. The Fair Housing Act's design and construction requirements are broken down into 7 basic requirements that provide for a minimum level of accessibility. 1. There must be an accessible entrance to the building which can be reached by way of an accessible route. For example, an accessible door at the top of a flight of stairs would not meet muster. It is crucial that the ways in which one reaches the door are just accessible as the physical door itself. 2. The public and common use areas in the building must be accessible and usable. Residents with disabilities have equal right to use the property services, from its lobby to its laundry room. 3. Usable doors. Doors in personal units, including those which lead out to outdoor spaces, must be accessible. This involves not only the width of the door, but the height of its threshold and overall weight. 4. Similar to the requirement discussed in number 1, the usable doors must be along accessible routes. Individuals should be able to enter their front door, go in and out of all rooms of the property, and exit onto outdoor space if available. 5. Environmental controls must be within reachable distance for those in a wheelchair. Electrical outlets risk being too low and unusable, while light switches and thermostats can be too high so that they are inaccessible. 6. Bathroom walls must be properly reinforced as to be suitable for the later installation of grab bars, if needed. 7. There are many standards that establish kitchens and bathrooms as usable, but overall, usable kitchens and bathrooms involve clear floor and turning space, accessible appliances, and conscious organization. While only skimming the surface, this overview has hopefully improved your understanding of accessible design and construction. Thanks again for watching our video. If you're aware of housing discrimination, please reach out to us to report it. We're creating this video during the COVID-19 pandemic, so we're not currently in the office. The easiest way to reach us is by email. We have a staff directory on our website. You can see the address on the screen. Email anyone in the Fair Housing Department and we'll get right back to you. And while you're visiting the website, please take a moment to support WRO by clicking the donate button. Housing is always essential. We're here to help. Like, subscribe, and share this video, and please follow us on social media.